if you were recording video in the early 2000s and you didn't want to deal with those freaking mini DV tapes and you didn't want to spend a ridiculous amount of money, you were probably shooting on a camera that looked a lot like this. And the video it recorded looked a lot like this. But luckily now, in 2021, we have reached a point where quality video is really pretty accessible. In fact, you can use almost any camera to get basically any shot. If then any camera can get any shot, why am I doing a video titled, "What camera should you buy?" Is this going to be another one of those inane, the gear doesn't matter videos? No, it's not. The gear matters. Of course the gear matters. It just doesn't necessarily matter in the way we tend to think of. It doesn't matter if you have this camera if you're not gonna use this camera the way it was built to be used. If you're gonna shoot video sporadically and you're not really gonna wanna learn how to use the camera, maybe don't buy a $5,000 camera, maybe buy a cheaper camera, right? That being said, I've got this broken down into 5 categories, and I've got 5 cameras here that fit into those categories. I'm not really pushing any of these 5 specific cameras or brands or models or anything like that. They just happen to be the machines I have on hand that fit into those categories. If you're interested in my favorites, the actual camera in each sort of section that I would recommend, look in the description below. I'll post links. We're gonna start with compact camcorders. Now, these cameras are 100% the cheapest and the easiest to use, and that's their biggest advantage. For $500, maybe even a little less, you can get a really, really usable camera. They're compact, they're lightweight, and again, they're just super easy to use. You're never gonna fight focus, you're just never gonna fight this camera. It's like shooting with your cell phone, only a little higher quality. These are great if you're going to be like doing a travel vlog or any kind of video where production quality is not as important as production speed. If your goal is to get things out quickly and easily, this is the camera for you. Now, that being said, this camera does have some disadvantages, and those disadvantages are sort of rooted in how easy to use it is. All of the manual features of this camera do still exist, but they're buried in menus, and they're hard to get to. It's not impossible, but it's kind of a pain. So if you're looking to do more cinematic, more produced looking stuff, this probably won't be the camera for you. That brings us then to our next category, which is the entry-level DSLR or mirrorless cameras. And yes, I know DSLRs and mirrorless are different, but we kind of use them in the same way, so I'm gonna talk about them in the same categories, okay? Entry-level DSLR mirrorless cameras are sort of where I send most people who are asking me what kind of camera should I buy. And the reason for that being is, if you don't know what you're doing with a camera, you just feel like you should own one because it's where you are in your life, this is it, right? Because, 2 reasons. They're both tied to money. 1, this camera is not as expensive as these cameras. And 2, it doesn't depreciate the way these cameras do. So if you spend $500 to $800, $900 on a camera in this category, right? And you put it in a closet and don't use it for a year, you can sell it and get most of your money back, unlike these cameras that are going to depreciate in value very, very quickly. Entry-level DSLR mirrorless cameras are a lot of fun. They have all of the manual control that you're looking for, and they make you feel a little more professional than using something like this. Downside of cameras like this is that while they do have all of those sort of manual features, they're still not necessarily as easy to get to as they could be. A lot of times you're gonna have to hit extra buttons to adjust certain things. It's not that it can't be done, especially if you're not gonna use the camera very often, if you're just sort of learning how things work. It's not a huge deal, but it can be kind of a pain. The other thing about cameras like this is that they tend to be crop sensor cameras, which means they've got a smaller sensor, which is not a huge deal, but it does mean the camera's not gonna do as well in low light, and you're gonna have some discrepancies in your depth of field, as well as if you start buying expensive lenses, nicer lenses that will actually go on this body, you're gonna notice things look a lot more zoomed in than they're supposed to be, because that sensor is smaller and it's actually cropping in on what you're doing. If you've got a little more money to spend, somewhere in the range of, let's say $1,000 to $2,500, that brings you into the range of sort of mid-level DSLR mirrorless cameras. Now, most of these cameras are gonna be full frame, which means they've got a bigger sensor, better at low light, better depth of field, all of that. And they also are gonna start doing things like they're gonna have all of the knobs and buttons be easily exposed. This does mean the camera is bigger, a little bulkier, a little harder to carry around, but it makes it a lot easier to use. This camera is really great if you actually know what you're gonna be doing. If you know, I'm gonna be a photographer, I'm gonna be a videographer, I'm gonna do my thing, and you've got projects you're gonna start working on, you don't need to learn how to use the camera. I know what f-stop is, I know what shutter speed does, I know what my ISO is, I know all of that, right? This is a great camera to look at, or cameras in this category are great to look at, because these are really built to learn on, these are built for actual use. That being said, they're not the end-all, be-all. While things are more accessible, yes, they are better in low light, things like that, they don't necessarily have the higher bit rates, the faster frame rates, the connectivity, the ability to attach other exterior units to it that high-end cameras do. This camera really is great if you know what you're gonna be doing, but you don't have $5,000 burning a hole in your pocket. Which then brings us to high-end DSLR mirrorless cameras. Now, these cameras are gonna run you between $2,500 and $6,000. I would never recommend spending more than $6,000 on your first camera. It's just, that's too much money to spend on something that you're not sure you're gonna use. However, if you are somebody who is actively working in video production or photography, or you're doing media production of some kind, a camera like this, if you've got the money for it, is gonna give you the most options. It is. Those options only matter though, again, going back to the beginning of this video, those options only matter if you've already figured out what they mean. If you don't know how to gauge what your ISO should be, if you don't know what f-stop is, if you don't know how shutter speed works, if you don't know how cameras actually function, don't buy a $5,000 camera. Buy a $800 camera and learn, okay? All three of these categories of camera have one disadvantage that they share. These are still cameras that have been adapted to shoot video. And one of the big trade-offs there is that these cameras really suck at recording audio. You're gonna have to get some kind of external audio recorder if you wanna get audio that is really, truly usable. Now, I said these are still cameras that have been adapted to shoot video. What if you're never gonna shoot photography? If you know you are a videographer only, production camcorders. These cameras still offer interchangeable lenses, they still offer high dynamic range and all of the things that you would expect from an expensive DSLR, but they're built for video. That's all they do. With a camera like this, you're gonna look to spend between $2,000 and probably $4,000 to get a really, truly usable camera, and you're just never gonna be disappointed by the quality of video this puts out. And because they're bigger, the way they're built, all of that, they've got proper XLR inputs, which means you can plug a real microphone into it. And they produce phantom power, which means you can use nice mics. If you want the all-in-one for video production, it's a camera like this, not a camera like this. That being said, if you're gonna shoot both video and photography, you're either gonna have to buy two cameras or settle for a DSLR. It's a give and take. Really, it comes down to what are you doing? And I know I said at the beginning of the video, what it comes down to, what are you doing and how often are you doing it? Just for the quick breakdown here, if you're doing run and gun where speed is more important than quality, do this. You're also looking at less than $500. If you've got $500 to $900 to spend and you want to start learning how to actually control the camera, look at an entry-level camera. These are great for really just, again, learning. That's what this is for. This is a great camera to learn the mechanics of videography, of photography. You won't be disappointed. If you already know how things work and you've got, $2,500 to spend, consider a mid-range camera. If you've got $3,000 to $6,000 to spend and you know how to use a camera and you're really ready to start working, get a high-end DSLR mirrorless. If you know you're never gonna shoot photos, if you're only gonna be a video person, production camcorder. And that is my breakdown of which camera you should buy depending on where you're at as a production specialist. So, buy a camera and keep shooting, friends.